So, hello everybody. I'm very happy to announce this joint seminar of the Landscape and the Biodiversity Centers of WSL. And every semester we have a joint seminar, which is very nice. Thank you, Nadia, for organizing it. And the joint seminar is always about the topic that touches not only biodiversity, but also landscape issues. And our next speaker is really in this, how do you call it, Schnittmenge of landscape and biodiversity. It is Julie Zähringer. She's a professor of land systems and sustainability transformations at the Wyss Academy for Nature at the University of Bern. Her research focuses on the assessment of telecoupled land system changes in forested landscapes of the global south. And the impacts of these land systems changes on ecosystem services and human well-being. She applies transdisciplinary research approaches and thus works toward a better understanding of trade-offs and the identification of leverage points for more sustainable land use and landscape management. Through her research, she contributes to the Wyss Academy's mission to transform scientific knowledge into action. And this Wyss Academy currently operates hubs in Central Europe, which is Bern, where she works, Southeast Asia, East Africa, and South America. And today we're going to hear something about land system science, from global drivers to local social ecological impacts in tropical biodiversity hotspots. Thank you, Julie. The floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Silvia, for this kind introduction, and thanks for joining me today. My research community is the one of land system science, so it's quite an inter- and transdisciplinary field, but maybe just a few words about my background. I studied biology at the University of Zurich, then did the master's in environmental science at ETH, and then moved on to Bern to do a PhD in geography and sustainable development. And now I'm a professor of land systems and sustainability transformations at this newly founded Wyss Academy for Nature, which is associated to the University of Bern, but I'm also affiliated with the Center for Development and Environment and the Institute of Geography at the University of Bern. And today I'm planning to take you on a journey across the tropics from Asia through East Africa to the Peruvian Amazon, but I'm also going to say a bit more about what the Wyss Academy is and what we do there, and I'll try to reflect also about some of the methodological challenges of our research and our research approaches in general. So as we are probably all aware, we are living in a sort of polycrisis nowadays. This means that, as on this image, you see there are many different intermingled crises going on worldwide. They range from social inequalities to climate change to pandemics and so on. And of course, the changes to the Earth system, they are one part of these different crises. And here we also see the latest update on the Earth system boundaries and how we've basically progressed to crossing some of these thresholds. So today already 6 out of the 9 boundaries, they have crossed a critical threshold, including the one on land system change, which in this case, I mean, as an indicator, it's mainly deforestation, but of course there are many other issues in land system change that have negative impacts on sustainable development. So this also means that unfortunately, we haven't really progressed very much on achieving the Sustainable Development Goal number 15, life on land, because today we are still losing a lot of forest every year. Only about 17% of the land globally is currently protected. Now the global biodiversity targets, they stipulate 30% by 2030, which might not be feasible. And we also have a lot of degraded land worldwide that's in need for restoration. So why is that? I mean, one fact that I would say contributes to like this slow progress on achieving more sustainable land use and land governance worldwide is that we have many competing claims on land. So from the global level, we can think about these claims, for example, through biodiversity, the global biodiversity targets, which call for more conservation on the ground, but then there are geopolitical initiatives such as the Chinese Belt and the Road Initiative that, of course, affect land tenure, access to land. But then we also have the climate agreements and the need for reforestation and so on. And together they affect specific locations worldwide. And this report, the Land Gap report, has shown how actually all the different national pledges for to mitigate climate change in terms of land-based interventions, so reforestation, afforestation, and so on, that actually, if you would have to implement them on the ground, there isn't even enough land available. So they are just not realistic, or they would come with very serious consequences for food security or other land uses that are currently in place, which would need to be replaced through tree plantations. So in my research, we consider land use change as both a cause and a consequence of global change. And by that, I mean, if we think of land use change as a consequence of global change, it's because there are many of these global processes, the ones I just mentioned, also international demand, of course, for commodity crops, demand for mineral resources and so on, that cause land use change in a certain place. And then this land use change in turn again affects global change through biodiversity loss, carbon emissions, water, air pollution, migration, and so on. So thinking about land use change, we always have these kind of feedbacks in mind. And this is also why the telecoupling concept comes in as a very useful or even necessary, I would say, analytical lens. It basically stipulates that you can't explain any local land use change anymore just by looking at local factors that cause this change or just the local actors who manage the land, but actually you have to consider the global interconnections with different social ecological systems where actors also take decisions that then affect land use in a distant place. And so the last of my introductory slides, just to say that as a part of the land system science community, these are some of the kind of principles, but of course there are many more that apply. So we look at land always as a social ecological system, land use change as a result of actors' claims, as I just said, with feedbacks to different social ecological systems. And it's also clear that we live on a used planet. So actually there are very few plots of land still available worldwide that have no claims on them that could just be used for like anything new that comes out of these global claims, for example. So with my research team, which I'm going to present in a moment, we are considering land system changes at the heart of sustainable development changes. We are contributing to the Wyss Academy's mission, which is to find new innovative approaches to actually, on the one hand, conserving nature, but also creating benefits or synergies with people's well-being worldwide. We are looking both at the drivers of land use change, but also the impact side, maybe a bit more strongly on the impact side, looking at impacts on ecosystem services and human well-being mainly. We have projects going on in different tropical biodiversity hotspots. Most of them are tropical humid forests, but we now also work in pastoral systems in northern Kenya, which are of course a very different social ecological context, but some of the challenges of biodiversity conservation are actually quite similar in these landscapes. And then somehow through our research, we're always trying to identify leverage points, like how could we intervene in these systems of land use change in order to transform those towards more sustainable land use and also more just outcomes for people. And we do this through mostly inter and transdisciplinary approaches, working as much as possible together with stakeholders in these different systems on the ground, also co-designing research together. And as part of the Wyss Academy, we are always trying to design research that directly feeds into implementation and interventions in our hub regions. We are also contributing to monitoring the impacts of the Wyss Academy's interventions in these regions. And we have a strong ambition to decolonize research through North-South partnerships. I will also say a few words about that later on. So the Wyss Academy for Nature has several components. These are just, I would say, two of our approach. So on the one hand, we have what we call these solutionscapes or living labs on the ground. They take place in the Peruvian Amazon, in East Africa, in Kenya, Madagascar, and in Southeast Asia, in Laos, but also in Switzerland, in the canton of Bern. And in all of these places, we use kind of a similar approach to test out what we call these incubators for system transformation, so projects that are interventions into the local social ecological systems. And this approach always involves a shared vision and strategy developed together with the different stakeholders in this place, a shared understanding of system dynamics. So here come in the different research teams that provide knowledge into these implementation endeavors. We have a learning, monitoring, and evaluation ambition and system in place. And in the end, we would like to create these what we call coalitions of change, where actors get together and actually take responsibility and action to drive these changes further, because we as an organization, for the moment, we are funded for 10 years and we don't know yet what will come after that. Maybe also to say we are funded through philanthropic funding sources on the one hand, from the Wyss Foundation, if you might know, and then also through the University of Bern and the canton of Bern. So there are these different funders behind. And then we have what we call an interdisciplinary faculty. So we have these 5 research teams, each headed by a professor at the University of Bern. And we work closely together on a number of projects to then, together with the teams we have, for example, in Peru, design research that's really useful for implementation there. So I'm heading the team of land systems. Then we have my colleague Edouard Davin on the climate scenarios. We have Margaret Awor on the biodiversity conservation, Kai Gehring on political economy, and Quinn Nguyen on environmental governance. And this is my team. I said it's a mirror of my vision because I really strive for diversity and working with people in my research team that actually come from these places where we try to solve challenges, but also enabling people from one place to maybe contribute to working in another place. So we have people from Madagascar working in Peru currently. And yeah, I won't go through the presentation of each and everyone, but there are a number of PhDs, postdocs, and research scientists. They are not all employed by the Wyss Academy. Some are employed at CD at the University of Bern, and others are also from our partner institutions, but they all form part of this team. And just to give you a brief overview where we work. So we do work in Madagascar. I will go into a bit more detail later on with some examples of projects there. We work mainly in northern Laos, where we have a third-party funded Biodiversity Plus project going on that looks at telecoupled impacts of conservation around the Namet Puloi National Park in northern Laos. We have quite a number of projects in the Peruvian Amazon. Here we also have this feature of what we call our interdisciplinary research projects. This means that at least 2 of our research teams come together and work on a concrete project in one of these places. So we have one, for example, on artisanal and small-scale gold mining, on which I will also present in a moment. We have some associated Marie Curie fellowship projects, and now we also work in Kenya. That's maybe the most recent place we started engaging, and I also spent 4 months there in the beginning of this year, having different people from my team joining to co-design the research we want to implement in Kenya together with our Kenyan team. So we have an office in Kenya with the Wyss Academy. So now I'm coming to the research, and I'm just going to pick a few examples from kind of the broad research in our team, and also trying to reflect how is this research transformative? I mean, what is really the contribution to solving challenges in terms of land use and sustainable development? And so the first two projects or parts of projects I'm going to present, they are from like prior research. So one was an SNF funded R4D research for development project on telecoupled landscapes. And the other one is NIS funded project on large scale extractive industries in Madagascar. And for these projects, I would say their contribution is mainly to providing scientific evidence on the land use changes driven by international commodity, crop demands, or also resource demands in Madagascar, and then use this knowledge to try and steer the regulations, the governance of these impacts towards more sustainable outcomes. So that's maybe the more like general approach to research. Then the other projects here, they are all now Wyss Academy funded, so from our own funding sources. We have one project in my team on soil relational values in Madagascar, and here it's about really unraveling the kind of relational values that people have with soils in this region, where often research so far has just focused on forests and people. And we think that this kind of evidence can really help to also refresh the whole conservation discourse, that it's not only about the forests themselves, but we really have to consider what's going on in the landscape around these forests. Then we have one project or study on the effect of conservation interventions in the Peruvian Amazon, where we evaluated basically the existing interventions that others have tried to do and see what is their effect on deforestation locally. And this then generates knowledge to better know where to invest to have like the biggest impact in terms of reducing deforestation with, let's say, the least money spent. And then the last project is one of these big interdisciplinary ones, the one on the artisanal small-scale gold mining in Peru. And here we really try to address a problem on the ground. So we have gold mining that leads to deforestation and mercury pollution in the Peruvian Amazon. And we see, like, on the one hand, with my colleague Kai Zähringer and his team, what kind of interventions in terms of improved technology could actually work. So we do experiments on the ground on technology adoption, but we also target social science research to understand the value chain of gold and the role of Switzerland in potentially sourcing clean gold from the Peruvian Amazon. Sorry, there was a bit of a mix up on the slide, but here the first example is from this R4D project, where in one part of the project we looked at human well-being links to land use and ecosystem services in forest frontiers of Laos, Myanmar, and Madagascar. And here the land use changes are really driven by external demands for commodity crops. So in Laos, for example, rubber, in Myanmar, oil palm, in Madagascar, vanilla, but also conservation interventions that are funded internationally that kind of arrive in these local places and cause land use changes. this was a very in-depth qualitative study where we looked at how did well-being, how is well-being defined in these local places and how did it change over time due to these land use changes. We used a theoretical framework by Martha Nussbaum on the central human capabilities and operationalized these through workshops and interviews in these different places. And what we found here, just an example from Madagascar, is how these different land use changes, or land uses first of all, which you see here on the left, how they affect or provide different ecosystem services from all dimensions, and how these in turn then affect the different well-being dimensions that were brought forward by Nussbaum. And here we see the results from Madagascar, where we find over 100 different links between land use and well-being. In Laos and Myanmar, those were a bit less. But then in all countries, we found that forests, maybe not surprisingly, had the largest set of ecosystem services and impacts on well-being, but also all the other land uses had important contributions to human well-being. And although income was supported maybe by the most broad share of land uses and ecosystem services, we also recorded many ecosystem services that were of a more intangible nature. So for example, in Laos, we have fish ponds that are important for recreational purposes. In Madagascar, the ecosystem service of bequest to descendants was really important. So people really want to conserve forests or also grow zebu cattle because they say this is an important kind of value we want to pass on to our children in the future. And also in Myanmar, we had, for example, secondary community managed forests that were very relevant for observing nature, recreation, and also pastime hunting. In a different part of the project, we did a spatial assessment on the different land use changes in these areas, and we then looked from the links we established before through the well-being assessment, how did these land use changes affect human well-being in these places? There are different ways through which land use changes can lead to well-being changes. That can happen, as I showed before, via ecosystem services, but there are also direct impacts from land use change on well-being that are regardless of ecosystem services. There are, of course, other changes happening in the systems that affect well-being, which are also not related to land use change. And then also change in one well-being aspect can change other well-being aspects. We found that the land use changes, they simultaneously affected provisioning, regulating, and cultural ecosystem services. And through those, they affected 14 out of the 16 different well-being dimensions. And I think what this can tell us is that while in many studies, due to data limitations, of course, if we want to do quantitative modeling of ecosystem services, we can maybe only model a few of these services, but then we might actually really miss out on a large number of well-being dimensions and not get the full picture. So this is one of the challenges there. We also found that because these impacts from land use change to human well-being, they are mediated through ecosystem services in many places, that the same land use change can affect the same well-being dimension in different ways. So for example, in Madagascar, there was a change from forest to shifting cultivation. This on the one hand negatively affected the well-being dimension of religion and traditions because cultural and spiritual values associated with forests were lost. But on the other hand, due to this land use change, more rice was produced, which again had a very important meaning in ancestor ceremonies, which again improved kind of the religion and spiritual well-being dimension. So these links are very deep and complex. And also the change in one ecosystem service can affect several well-being dimensions at once. Now we had a number of methodological learnings. It's highly context dependent, as we saw between the three countries. Sometimes it's also not so clear, do these differences in the number of links mean something, or is it just two different ways of communicating about well-being, for example, in these areas? And we really need to ask questions openly. We need to reformulate them to get to the specific well-being aspect. And also doing such assessments create a lot of data. So I'm still struggling to really bring this together in a publication, because how do you write about this without then getting, without losing the nuances? The next example will move us to Madagascar. Here we looked at the large-scale extractive industries affecting land use and livelihoods. There we did a household survey around 5 of these large-scale mining investments with a counterfactual sampling design. Here we found that the main land uses affected through these large-scale mining investments were irrigated rice, agroforestry, and permanent crops. In the perception of these land users, these investments, they negatively affected soil and crop production due to soil, water, and air pollution. They also perceived that these investments were responsible for deforestation or for changes like blocking land users' access to forests, because all of a sudden there was this big mine that didn't let them pass through. And they also observed negative impacts on their well-being, mainly related to health issues and security problems, and sometimes also social conflicts. And in this study, we learned that the impacts of these investments, they don't only occur once investments are fully in place, but already during the exploration phases of these mining investments. And this is something that's usually not considered in environmental impact assessments, because those only have to be done once the permit, or basically once it's clear that there is an interest of the investor to dig up the place to look for these resources. We also compared between villages closer to these investments and further away, and we found that these investments, they occur also quite far away from the mines. This means that it's really difficult to find like a counterfactual to really do what we call a rigorous impact evaluation, because even the villages that were 20 kilometers away, which we thought were like our controls, in the end, they were also somehow affected still through these mining investments, as of course pollution and other effects, they travel through space. For those who are interested, there is also a new policy brief that we just published with some of these results, and also a paper that came out recently. In the third example, one of my research team members, Svitlana Lavrentiuk, is looking at soil relational values in Madagascar. She used a qualitative approach, applying long distance walks with stakeholders, land users in these landscapes, because these can really activate modes of situated and relational participation, as like body and environment are connected, and breaks away a bit from the usual more human-centered research approaches. She also used video documentation in the context of these landscapes to situate the different emotions that she captured from land users. And when I asked her about challenges she encountered in this research, of course, the language barrier is one. That's always a challenge for us if we do research in these places where we don't actually speak the local languages and have to go through translators. Also just the cultural difference, and how do you articulate such emotions, or like how you think about something like soil are very different. And then of course there might be a bias because of the researcher's specific position, as in this case a more Western trained scientist. In terms of results, she found that these categories on the left, they were really showing how soil provides relational values to people and meaning. So they range from individual to collective identity, social cohesion, connectedness to place, spiritual, sacred values, and stewardship. And so there is really a strong connection of people with the soils, not only with forests, but really with their agricultural lands and soils. And it makes soils a key component of identity formation and community cohesion. And lastly, also, like the advent of Christianity in this region has really profoundly altered these relations with soil. So some of these relations and values actually got lost over time. Now from this very qualitative, we come to a very quantitative assessment that one of my postdocs, Pablo Negret, did on evaluating the effectiveness of different governance mechanisms preventing deforestation in the Peruvian Amazon. So this is like a spatial matching analysis that took into account deforestation measured through the nationally available deforestation layers in Peru between areas that are falling under a specific governance regime versus areas that are unprotected in the landscape, but very similar to these pixels that are within these so-called protected areas. And what he found here was that here on this plot, you see the different types of interventions or governance mechanisms. We have protected areas here. They like fared the best, one could say, in preventing deforestation. They avoided 88% of deforestation that would have otherwise occurred. But also indigenous managed lands, they prevented still a 44% of deforestation. And this is very important because if we look at the spread of these governance mechanisms in the Peruvian Amazon, then the indigenous lands, they have actually more area than the protected areas, which also means that if we now really invest in further slowing deforestation in these indigenous areas by providing the necessary resources, for example, to indigenous populations who manage these areas, then we could have quite a large impact on further slowing deforestation. Here we have a preprint out already, and the main paper is currently under review. Of course, there are also some methodological challenges. As many of you might be aware, in such quantitative assessments, we might have a hidden bias because some variables that actually might affect these outcomes could not be taken into account for the spatial matching because there is simply no spatial data available on them. For example, you could think about nutrition status of populations that might also affect deforestation, for which we didn't have any data to control for. Then there might be underlying errors in the data we use, like the national deforestation layers. And as I said, in our case, some data that might have been important to use in this assessment is just not available. And the last research example that I would like to briefly touch upon is this one on the artisanal and small-scale gold mining in the Peruvian Amazon. What you see here is what part of the area looked like in 2010 versus 2019. So this is what artisanal and small-scale gold mining then looks like. And besides the deforestation, there is a lot of mercury input into the ecosystems. The mercury has even been measured in, for example, birds that live in these forests nearby, which now have mercury polluted bodies and feathers. And here we are kind of taking advantage on the unique position that we have with the Wyss Academy, where we are based both in Peru and in Switzerland, and we also have like the freedom to have the research funding available to enter like through both systems. So in Peru, we are testing how could technology adoption happen for mercury-free production of gold, what are the barriers of implementation, and how can we get rid of those, with the goal that eventually we could actually, these smallholders, these small-scale miners could produce gold that is mercury-free. We are also employing a large sample quantitative baseline to really understand the different types of small-scale miners we have and what are their characteristics and so on. And on the other hand, and this is the part that I was more involved in, we looked at the situation in Switzerland with the idea that Switzerland being one of the main importers of gold, if we manage to produce clean gold in Peru, could then Switzerland become like an important market for that gold from Madre de Dios? Could we help establish these value chains from Madre de Dios to Switzerland? And so we tried to find out from refineries in Switzerland, but also sellers like the jewelers, what is their view? I mean, what are their conditions or maybe barriers to importing clean gold from such a place in the Peruvian Amazon? And we found that there is actually a trend in Switzerland of including gold sourced from artisanal and small-scale mining into the market, and the jewelers especially, they are really interested in building consumer trust around this artisanal and small-scale gold. Although the motivation for them to do so stems less from like consumer demands. Actually, consumers in Switzerland seem to be not very aware of how gold is produced generally, or then what's the difference between large-scale gold mining and artisanal gold mining. So it's really not a consumer pressure that leads to like, yeah, a demand for more sustainably produced gold, but it's more like a sense of responsibility of these value chain actors and also concerns around reputation that leads them to work towards sourcing more clean produced gold. But then at the same time, the regulations in Switzerland are becoming more strict, which makes it again more difficult to source gold from a region like Madre de Dios, which of course has a lot of insecurity, instability going on, corruption issues, and so on. And yeah, so it might in the end be very difficult, even if in Peru we manage to produce a part of the gold in Madre de Dios through more sustainable means, have it certified and so on. There might still be a lot of hesitation from the Swiss value chain actors to engage with it, because overall the Peruvian Amazon doesn't exactly have a very kind of positive reputation in terms of security, corruption, and so on. So unfortunately, probably for us, it means that we might not be able to link like the producers in Peru directly with our system here in Switzerland. But if we manage in Peru to produce more clean gold, we might have to look for different markets that are interested in sourcing it. And yes, with this, I come to the conclusions. So we saw from the first study how there are strong nuances in how land use changes affect ecosystem services and human well-being in different contexts. The study on mining in Madagascar showed that the impacts of such land interventions or concessions, they can travel very far, and they often fall like under the radars of social environmental impact assessments. Also important for conservation in Madagascar is that the communities around protected areas, such as the one in Masoala, which I showed, they're really deeply rooted in their soils and they value the land far beyond forests. But there is also a threat through, of course, one could say modernization or ongoing global changes that these values might be lost or uprooted. In the Peruvian Amazon, we found that focusing conservation interventions towards supporting indigenous peoples management might actually have the biggest effect on reducing deforestation. And as I just said, even in Switzerland, Swiss actors in the gold value chain might be very hesitant to source gold from Madre de Dios. So I hope this has given you some ideas on the kind of research we do. And yeah, I think for each of these studies, it helps to reflect on the transformative potential that our research actually has. We do that in the Wyss Academy for each of our projects, where we develop a theory of change and really think it through, like how do we think, does our research make a contribution to sustainable development? We co-designed the research together with the teams in our hubs to make the research as concrete as possible in order to help finding solutions for local challenges. But this, of course, also takes a lot of time because we are people from research, we are people from the implementation side. We might not actually speak the same language, have the same kind of experience of how we work together. So it sounds quite easy as we have the money to do it, and it's also a big privilege to be able to do so, but it's not that easy to do, and we are still learning a lot on how to improve these relations between research and implementation. Also, like our ambition to decolonize our research is sometimes really hampered by the current academic system that we are all working in, which really prioritizes output over like more just and sustainable processes. And then also with the Wyss Academy's unique funding situation comes a lot of freedom for research, but then there is also a strong impact focus, which again is a bit limiting sometimes for the research. And we also experience it that like this daily really expectation that whatever we do, it has to produce impact, and we need to solve these global problems can also affect people's mental health if we are not careful about managing that. And then just on a personal note, I think enabling the integration of family and an academic career really takes a village. And luckily I have this village with my research team, which is very supportive here, for example, on a 1-month field mission in remote northern Laos, where I took my child along. And I think there are also necessary institutional changes in our systems to really enable people who want to have a family to embark on a research career. Well, thanks a lot for your attention. I have many people to acknowledge, of course, especially the ones always helping to collect the data in places, remote places like northern Madagascar, Laos, or Myanmar. And yeah, I'm available for your questions, and please also get in touch if you want at some point to go deeper on any of the things presented. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Julie, for this very big and interesting presentation. You showed us very clearly how we in Switzerland are also impacting the people in the global south, not only with the gold we have in our ear or on our fingers, but also with all these seldom earth that we have in our smartphones and computers and so on. So this is a kind of telecoupled land use and the land use systems, and you are really pointing to it in a very good way. Are there any questions to Julie or comments on this talk? Not yet. So actually, I have a question. As you are doing a lot of transdisciplinary research, I'm also engaged in transdisciplinary research together with Tim in a real world lab. And it is very important that we speak the Swiss German because it's in the Jura Park, so it's in Argovia. And how do you manage the language or the language barriers, and particularly with people in somewhere not in urban areas where they perhaps speak a dialect or not a written language? How do you do your workshops with those people?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. Of course, that's something that's always impacting our work, but I didn't have the time to go into the details. In all of these places, we work through long-term research partnerships. So for example, in Madagascar, we actually have a team in place of 12 people, Malagasy people who lead all of our research and interventions there. And then people from my team or other teams, they come in at times and work together with the local researchers, also publish together. And they are constantly there to lead these transdisciplinary processes. So I only showed like small kind of parts of the research, but behind is always a process, including the different stakeholders led by Malagasy people. But even there, I mean, the region we work in northeastern Madagascar is very different from like the capital of Madagascar, and there might even be certain cultural and also language differences that sometimes make it not so easy to lead these processes. And yeah, similar also for Laos and especially Peru.
So this remains a challenge with transdisciplinary research.
Yes, definitely.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Thank you for this great talk. I just have a general question. Like, you started with achieve biodiversity targets that we are failing in accomplishing those targets. Then you talk about the Chinese Belt and Road initiatives. So when you see the ecosystem services and the well-being of humans, so how do you can quantify if there is some big developmental projects like Belt and Road initiative, it will have some effect on the ecosystem services, but on the other side it will help uplifting few human population, their income, there will be resources for new jobs for the population around the built up areas. And then in the Southeast Asia, the palm cultivation is changing the ecosystem there, but it's also helping the local people also. So when it is choosing between conservation, biodiversity conservation, ecosystem services conservation, and human well-being, how do you quantify this thing, and what will be your suggestion and approach to this kind of problems?
Yes, thanks a lot. I mean, that's the big question. I think it's kind of a wicked situation. But first of all, I would say it's not that clear that such kind of interventions actually always lead to poverty reduction and improve the economic well-being of the local populations. Even that is still a big step to make, because in the example of the Madagascar mining investments, actually there were very few jobs created for the people living in this place. I mean, yes, for Malagasy people coming from other towns and so on, maybe there were jobs, but not for the very local land users who then had to deal with a lot of other issues such as pollution. And also, even if these kind of interventions, they improve income, then still other well-being dimensions that are also important might get lost. So this is really the big question: how can we kind of foster a development that is in synergy with nature or the environment? And yeah, I think first of all there also needs to be regulations and safeguards of such kind of investments, such as the ones that come out of this Chinese Belt and Road initiative.
Yes, and your research helps finding these trade-offs and bringing them, shed light on them so that you can discuss them.
Yes, I mean, that's one of the contributions we can make.
Other questions from the room? Because I think Nadia has a question from the chat.
Yes, we have a question from Anna Herzberger, and she says, can you tell a bit about the transformative potential that has been realized through your projects? Which transformation are you looking for? How can you evaluate progress?
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's another big and important question. And we are currently actually working on this evaluation framework with the Wyss Academy to really see what are the transformative impacts that we have in these different places. We have to say the Wyss Academy is only like 4 years old, and we are only implementing the first things now. So it's very difficult to say what we have achieved or not. And I think in the research project I presented from before, I mean, there it was mainly through like really deep stakeholder processes that some types of social learnings took place, that stakeholders came out of the process and said, okay, now I understand that actually we have a problem if we don't kind of manage to regulate the impacts that come on the one hand from like commodity crop value chains in Madagascar, and the ones coming from conservation, because they affect the same people on the ground. But we now realize that somehow through the administration, we need to manage these different stakeholders who come into our local system and try to achieve different things with the same people. I mean, these are maybe the kind of things we can say for now, but hopefully during the next years we will really learn more about how the Wyss Academy's approach has really worked in places.
Okay, thank you. Another question from the chat? Is there another one?
Yeah, well, we have more a comment than a question. So Stephanie Schwabs says, thank you very much for your very interesting talk. Just a consideration from my side. I would not consider the hesitation from the Swiss gold resellers to cooperate with small-scale gold washers in the Peruvian Amazon, not as a prediction or forecast, but as an obstacle to overcome. Thank you very much for the positive impulses you and your team give with your research.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I fully agree with that. I mean, this is just now the kind of situation we have, and the question is really how can the Swiss system in that regard become more open? What kind of regulations would also actually help these supply chain actors who are willing in principle to source from these places? And also how can we raise consumers' awareness and kind of empathy for like the people who produce gold in these different places?
Okay, are there other questions or comments on this talk? Is there anything else in the chat? Okay, so then I don't want to make it longer. Actually, Nadia booked a table in the cantina. So if anybody wants to talk longer with Julie, you can go there. I don't think you are invited, but you can sit down with Julie and talk to her. And even if you want to have an in-depth talk with her, just ask her if she could stay for a little bit longer in the afternoon, and you have the chance to talk to her. So then thanks a lot for coming. And how many were there on, how many participants? How many participants did we have on Zoom?
25.
25. So it's about 36 people who attended your talk. Thank you very much, Julie, and good luck with your research.